So like we always do, we're gonna start from the beginning to little baby Ted Bundy, Theodore Bundy to be exact. He was born in 1946 on November 24th. That's my brother's birthday. Not the 1946, I don't have a brother that's significantly older than my parents. That would be weird. Anyway, he was born on November 24th, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont, USA. Now Ted had a pretty odd upbringing, and not odd as in like your mom keeping all your teeth that have fallen out in a drawer and she shows you later when you're an adult. Just me? All right. But Ted's upbringing was odd because his entire knowledge of what his family unit was essentially a giant lie. He thought his father was somebody he wasn't, and he thought his mother was somebody she wasn't, because they were actually his grandparents, and he wouldn't learn this until later on in life. So he already has massive trust issues. So Ted would grow up thinking that his actual mom was his sister, and like I said, his grandparents were his actual parents. He was quoted saying to a coworker later in life, Anne Rule, who also wrote a book that we'll talk about later, saying, "When I was born, my mother couldn't say that I had..." I don't know what he talks like. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna make him sound stupid.
"When I was born, my mother couldn't say that I was her baby. I was born in a home for unwed mothers. And when she took me home, she and my grandparents decided to tell everyone that I was her brother and that they were my parents. So I grew up believing that she was my sister, that I was a late baby born to my grandparents."
Yeah, that's a good voice. That's a good voice, because people think he's like attractive and whatnot, and he sounds attractive. I don't think so. Okay, well, I'm gonna make him sound as ugly as he is. Continue. So at 22 years old, Eleanor Louise Cowell gave birth to Theodore Robert Cowell, which is Ted Bundy, at the Elizabeth Lund maternity home for unwed mothers in Burlington, Vermont. And she would go on to do just what Bundy claimed to his friend Anne Rule. Her parents would pretend to be Ted's parents and make him believe that Eleanor was his sister instead of his mother. And Bundy would start displaying pretty disturbing behavior from an early age, which is pretty common for most serial killers, although he didn't have that like top 3, this is definitely a serial killer thing. He didn't light shit on fire, he didn't wet his bed, and he also didn't hurt animals that we know of. But he did, at the age of 3, approach his auntie while she was taking a nap and surrounded her completely inside of a circle of knives. Dude, what the if a 3-year-old did that to me, he would stay 3, if you know what I mean. I'm just kidding. Anyway, and she would wake up to him staring blankly and giggling at her. So she was just like, "Oh, what the oh, what the what, these knives around me?" And then you just hear in the background like, you know what I mean? Anyway, probably would have solved a lot of issues, but I digress. She would go on to say after Ted Bundy got caught to interviewers saying,
"Not like other children. He looked and acted like them, but he was haunted by something else."
How can a 3-year-old be haunted by something? Their biggest issue is finding a permanent marker to draw on the wall with, or in this case, find knives to put a satanic circle around you, but I don't know. Or, you know, he was haunted by the fact that he fantasized about cutting his peers' heads off and performing horrific acts on them after the fact, but that's just me. But Ted was actually known to be quiet, shy, and a stuttering kid, and people would say that he had a general superiority aura about him, thinking he was going to grow up to be somebody incredibly important. Classic psychotic narcissist, just thinking that you're better than everyone else, everyone's below you, and basically you don't care what anybody else thinks. That's exactly how Ted Bundy was. He had a superiority complex like no other. And when Ted became a teenager, he said he didn't really know how to maintain a proper relationship, and that he just fell out of place in school. But the people he grew up with said he was a medium fish in a small pond, so he was pretty well liked because he was able to put up that mask. He was able to be a chameleon amongst his peers, and this is what he does throughout his entire life, basically. He was basically mimicking people so he would fit in, or studying people or psychology in order to fit in as well and get his way. But the biggest reason why he was liked in school specifically was because he was pretty. He was, you know, a good-looking guy in some people's eyes. I think he's a disgusting monster, but if you didn't know that he was a serial killer, I guess I get it. But he was pretty standard looking, you know, he kind of had a unibrow, which loser, I don't know. I'm not gonna make fun of it. If you have a unibrow, good on you. But Ted Bundy, you're a piece of shit. Anyway, in comes the pretty privilege though. So you have this guy that is narcissistic superiority, he's good looking, and he's very smart, well read, and he's able to talk to anybody in a room. So it's just like this politician, basically. But you could see all these factors just thrown in our serial killer stew. You know, we're mixing up the pot and it's not looking good. And this would also be around the time that Ted would fixate on something, which was snow skiing. And I hate that he loved snow skiing, because that's something I love, and the fact that he loves it just makes me want to. But it's okay. He's dead. What do we care? Anyway, but Pretty Boy Ted was also kind of a bad boy in high school, getting arrested twice for suspicion of burglary, sorry, and auto theft, which he will do a lot. The auto theft specifically later in life. He was really good at stealing cars. And he used to steal ski equipment and also forge ski lift tickets as well, which is, you know, pretty mild. The Grand Theft Auto is pretty bad, but you know, who hasn't forged a ski lift ticket or two? Am I right? I'm just kidding. I've never done that before. Don't do that, please. And in 1967, he would end up going to the University of Washington, where he met his first and supposedly only love, Stephanie Brooks. Now, her name wasn't actually Stephanie Brooks, but she goes by that alias to protect herself, essentially. So we're going to be calling her Stephanie Brooks. So Ted was in love with her as much as he could be, right? As much as a narcissistic psychopath could be. I think he was more like obsessed with the idea of her, because she was beautiful, she was rich, and she had an extremely powerful family in the political space. And these were all things that mattered a lot to Ted, because he just wanted to work his way up the ladder. He was willing to step on people's heads no matter what to make his way up the ladder. And Stephanie Brooks was one of them. And I think he was under the delusion that obsession and want was love, and it wasn't. Ted Bundy is incapable of love. He only loves one thing, and that is himself. But luckily, she would dump his ass, and he would unfortunately become even more obsessed with her. Because when you tell a narcissist no, that just means yes in their brain, or try harder. And coming from somebody that's been with a narcissist before, this is so true. It is so true. It's just messed up. So he went on a 6-year-long game trying to get Stephanie Brooks back. But during this long game, Bundy would meet his better-known other half, Elizabeth Kendall. If you've seen the movie Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile, terrible movie name. I've always hated that movie name. But anyway, Elizabeth was the one played by Lily Collins, Ted Bundy / Zac Efron's other half. So Bundy and Kendall met in October 1969 at a bar while they were both living in Seattle. She was a 24-year-old divorced single mom working at the University of Washington, where 22-year-old Ted Bundy was attending school. They would soon hit it off, and she would invite Ted Bundy back to her apartment. No! Luckily, she was fine. She felt sick that night, and they would go to bed, and apparently they would just sleep in bed, and she would wake up in the morning, and Ted was making her daughter Molly pancakes. And Elizabeth would say in later interviews,
I fell in love with him from day one. He took my breath away.
Probably wanted to take your breath away, but not in the way that you think. All right. And he did think about that as well. There was a few times later down the line when she caught him doing some pretty sus stuff, looking at her with a flashlight under the blankets while she was sleeping, and also doing some sus things with Molly later down the line as well, like playing hide and seek with her while he was niqad under a blanket while aroused. We're just getting into piece of shit territory. He's already a piece of shit, but she would learn all of this a lot later and kind of put the pieces together in her head later, but we'll get into that as well. So her daughter Molly would also fall in love with Ted very quickly as well, and immediately after that first morning, they would begin a pretty serious relationship. Bundy's relationship with Miss Kendall, though, was pretty volatile. In February 1970, they obtained a marriage license, but he would rip it up a few days later during a fight. So they would never actually get married ever. They just stayed boyfriend and girlfriend, and they were like off and on all the time. It was a very, very toxic relationship, as you would assume with a psychopathic, narcissistic, serial killing murderer, you know? And anyway, I digress. And 2 years after that incident, she would actually become pregnant, but Ted Bundy would make her have an abortion because she needed to work to put him through law school. What a gem. What a great guy, you know? What a great fella. What a piece of shit. Anyway, but shortly before that incident, he would get a job at a Slewer Slide Hotline Center in 1971. And this would not only be an incredibly ironic job for a future serial killer, this would be by design. Because Bundy didn't necessarily lack empathy. He was capable of it, but he used it to create pleasure for himself, if that makes sense. Like, he was smart enough to know how the other person was feeling. So when you put him in a situation like this where he has desperate people on the other line, he felt like he had all control. It's all about control for Ted Bundy and all about pain. Like in the times in the future when he is torturing and mutilating the girls, he was able to empathize with them and understand how they felt, but he enjoyed that aspect of it. He enjoyed the fact that they were suffering and was very aware of it. And Anne Rule, his former coworker at the Slewer Slide Hotline call center and author, would go on to write a book about working with the serial killer Ted Bundy, at the time not knowing he was a serial killer, and she would title that book The Stranger Beside Me. And she would go on to describe what it was like to work with Bundy in the book, and here are some quotes from it.
On the surface, at least, it seemed that I had more problems than Ted did. He was one of those rare people who listen with full attention, who evince genuine caring by their very stance. You could tell things to Ted that you might never tell anyone else.
Because he was very open. He was just like sitting there like this, but he was just murdering people in the back of his brain while he's staring at you, but he's hoping that you think that he's actually listening, and this is exactly what he did. This is exactly how he did it. And then she would also go on to say,
the only clue I had was that my dog, who liked everyone, didn't like Ted at all. Whenever he bent over my desk at the crisis clinic, she growled and the hackles on her neck stood up. The lesson is clear. Pay attention to your dog.
Absolutely. With ghosts, murderers, people that are sus, just listen to your dogs. Your dogs know if somebody sucks. But yeah, the book is very interesting. I haven't read all of it, but I've read a lot of it, and it is very good if you want to look at that book and want to get more in depth, because I can't be sitting here for like 8 hours and telling you about this. You'd get tired of me. But Anne explains that working with Ted was essentially an overall positive experience, and the only reason Anne didn't end up becoming one of his victims was because Anne didn't exactly fit his MO. MO meaning modus operandi, which is a Latin phrase for meaning a person's specific way of doing things. In this case, a serial killer picking out his victims and how he carries that act out. And Ted's victim type looked incredibly similar to his 6-year long game ex, Stephanie Brooks. Coincident? I think not. But he also most likely never killed Anne because he knew her, and Ted primarily killed strangers, pretty much only killed strangers to remain undetected, because he was smart. I mean, most murders happen to somebody who you're close with. Like if I was to get murdered, you'd look at, my mom, my dad, Caleb. Not that any of them would murder me, although they are in my will. If I go missing, please. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, but he always had a reasoning for what he was doing. He always thought things through. He was very much a process killer, and that shows in the future murders that he committed. This would also be the time when Ted would enroll in a psychology major, which he would use later on and utilize in his criminal endeavors. Like I said, he's always thinking about something. He always wants to learn how to manipulate people better so he can get his way. And it's also around this time in 1972 when he first gets involved in politics. What? Oh my God, what? A psychopathic narcissist that wants to be a politician? I've never heard of such a thing. All of them are. But this would be his only toe dip into politics, though. And it would specifically be for the long game, becoming involved with Governor Dan Evans' re-election campaign. Ted would pose as a college student and shadow the opponent of the governor just so he could get the stump speeches from him. And he would bring them back to Davis, telling him how to beat his opponent. So he literally went undercover and eavesdropped on the competition for Dan Evans. Like, he's just a giant piece of shit. I feel like that's just all politics. So I just feel like it's all fake. It's all fake and everybody's a piece of shit. I need to drink water. What the heck? And Davis would go on to describe Bundy as smart, aggressive, and a believer in the system. He believed in that system, man, because it went in his favor. We'll get to that, but goddamn, yeah. And in 1973, the long game would pay off, and Ted would get back with his first sweetheart, Stephanie Brooks. Or he would finally convince her to get back with him, basically. And they would even get engaged soon after. And for those of you who are like, wait, what happened to Elizabeth Kendall? Where is she? She's here. They're still dating, and Kendall and Brooks know nothing about each other because Bundy is just a massive piece of shit. I don't know how this guy doesn't get tired. I mean, he's not killing women just yet, I guess, or that we know of. But yeah, so he's with both women at this time. But in classic narcissistic fashion, as soon as Stephanie agreed to get engaged to him, Bundy would soon after just cut off all contact with her. He was the first one to just ghost he just stopped talking to her completely, which is bonkers. but makes sense for Ted because he's a piece of shit, as we know. But this is a classic narcissist type of behavior and psychopathic type of behavior, because he had a goal, he chased it, and then as soon as he got it, he just didn't want it anymore. It's like a dog chasing a bone, and then he gets the bone, and then he figures out that there's no meat on the bone, so he just tosses it away. Did you like that analogy? I'm pretty good at those. So she would continuously try to contact him, and she would get a hold of him one day on the phone, and she would be like, what the f happened? Where are you? Like, what, we just got engaged, like, what's going on? And he would literally just say to her,
I have no idea what you mean.
he's such a gaslighter, dude. He's gaslighting me and he's dead. Anyway. But this is believed to be the catalyst to the beginning of his murder spree, which kind of makes sense. So all of his victims would look significantly like Stephanie Brooks, and you can kind of look at that like, we don't necessarily know why. There's some serial killers that kill women that look like their mothers because they don't like them, similar to Ed Kemper, or other serial killers that kill women that look like their wives, and in this case, he was killing women that look like Stephanie Brooks. And also, his current girlfriend, Elizabeth Kendall, looked a lot like Stephanie Brooks as well, so he clearly had a type. That's what I'm trying to say. He had a type. So on January 4th, 1974, a woman named Karen Sparks, living in the University District neighborhood of Seattle, was attacked in her home and left for dead. The perpetrator would break into her home as Karen was sleeping in her bed. He would take a metal pole off of her bed frame and begin to bash her head in. And then he would continue to use that same pole to violate her and SA her very violently. He would go so far up that it would puncture her bladder. And after that event, Sparks would be found by her roommate after 20 hours after the ordeal, still breathing. She would suffer permanent brain damage, significant loss of hearing and vision, and obviously the internal injuries from the SA. But she would survive, and she would be assumed to be Ted Bundy's first victim. Karen would later relay to the police and the press that she saw Ted Bundy multiple times stalking her around campus. He was stalking his prey, if you will. So although it's not recognized under the gaze of the judicial system, it is widely believed that Karen was obviously his first victim. Especially, you're going to hear what happened to all the other victims, and it's so incredibly obvious that it was Ted Bundy that did this. And this would make sense as his first victim too, because it was somewhat sloppy in the fact that she was still alive by the end of the assault. And it would happen in the exact same spot as the other murders would happen, and also in the same time frame. Everything just kind of adds up together. But the first official murder victim of Ted Bundy would be soon after his first attack in 1974, only a month after Karen's attack. 21-year-old Linda Ann Healy was a popular student at the University of Washington, the same school that Ted Bundy went to. What? And she was also a weather and ski reporter at a local radio station as well. It's very possible that Ted ran into her because he loves skiing. There's a good chance that he ran into her, liked what he saw, and then, started stalking her as well. So in February 1974, police would be called following up on a missing person call regarding Healy. They would find blood on Healy's bed sheets and pillow, but not enough to indicate that she had bled to death necessarily, and no indication to where she had gone. Her nightgown would hang in the closet with a ring of dried blood around the neck, but some of her clothes, her pillowcase, and her backpack were also missing. It seemed that whoever bludgeoned her had crept into her room, knocked her unconscious, removed her pajamas, and dressed her in fresh clothes. Sounding similar? Sounding like something that he wanted to do but didn't end up getting to do with his first victim, Karen Sparks. I'm just saying. Clearly, he was taking her to a second location. Never go to a second location with anybody. Although in this case, I don't think she had a choice, and she was unconscious. But 3 days after her abduction, a male voice called 911.
Listen, and listen carefully. The person who attacked the girl on the 8th of the last month and the person who took Linda Healy away are one and the same. He was outside both houses. He was seen.
How fucking creepy is that? Like, what do you even say to that? I'd be like, what fucking riddle is this? What? But police would never get the caller's name. So Healy's disappearance was the first sign for the police that something sinister was occurring. But it would take them a very long, way too long time to suspect Bundy. And 14 months after her disappearance, her skull and jawbones were found on Taylor Mountain, about an hour's drive from her home. And we'll hear a lot about Taylor Mountain because it was one of his favorite places to drop bodies, basically. And it was one of his favorite places to come back to violate those bodies, but he's not doing that just yet. But this MO would carry on through a lot of Bundy's murders at the beginning. He would break in, usually at night, often around exam periods, so the girls were very stressed and distracted, and he would often do it near or during construction work sites. So if anybody's screaming or making too much noise, there was construction going on, so it would mask it. So he's thinking about all of the aspects. It's very creepy, and just for him to go through all that, I mean, it's all so fucking terrible, but you can just see how strategic he was in everything that he did. And in the future, he would up the ante by faking injuries so he could more easily get girls to help him or carry stuff inside of his car, where he would then bludgeon them. And he would always be sure to wear a turtleneck as well, because he would be able to cover a very identifiable mole on his neck, because besides that mole, he had pretty generic features. He was good looking, but not easily described, because like if you looked at Bundy, I don't even know how, like they did end up getting sketches of him, but I feel like it's very hard to describe him because he's just a generic looking motherfucker. You know what I'm saying? And during this time, he would still be with Liz and Molly, but Bundy's behavior began to change in Liz's eyes. He would drop out of her life mysteriously for several days, for example, leaving her to worry that she had done something wrong. Then he would return like nothing happened. Just a classic gaslighter, dude. And anytime she asked like, where were you? He was just like, he would just put the blame on her. Like, what, you don't trust me? What? Just because I went on a little road trip for like 7 days and I was just like out in the forest, just like, you know, having relations with a dead body, so that's a problem for you? You're crazy. And she would fear that he was seeing other women. But in fact, it was then that he began his killing spree in Seattle specifically. So I guess you could say he was seeing other women for temporarily. Anyway, it's terrible. But in March of 1974, only 1 month after Healy's murder, Donna Gail Manson would be his next victim. And all his victims up to this point and in the future would be killed 1 month apart or less moving forward. So he was escalating pretty rapidly through this year specifically. Donna Gail Manson was a 19-year-old student at Evergreen State College, south of Seattle, and she would disappear on her way to a campus concert. Her body was never technically found, but Bundy later claimed he burned her skull in the fireplace of his girlfriend, Elizabeth Kendall. Bundy would later say in interviews,
"Of all the things I did to Liz, this is probably the one she is least likely to forgive me for."
Yeah, no shit, dude. And it was around this time that Bundy would have the audacity to start working at the Washington State Department Emergency Services, essentially a place where missing people would be reported to. So he could basically keep tabs on all things happening during the abductions and murders that he was committing himself, which again, it's just like, it's very smart. It's very smart. And I'm not giving him any accolades. I'm just saying, like, he really knows where to place himself and who to know. But it was around this time also that he would start to be described and reported by multiple people. So he would hear if someone was describing a man in a turtleneck or a man with crutches was last seen with this missing woman, and just adjust accordingly. And he would even start introducing himself as an officer to young women, calling himself Officer Ted Roseland. That is so fucking cringe. See, this is what I don't understand. He's so smart and everything, and then he uses his own first name, and I think it was just purely out of just him thinking that he was smarter and better than everyone. Like, he's like, I can use my first name and still not get caught. Like, it has to be that, because other than that, like, he's a smart guy. I don't understand why he would use his first name. Like, this guy, he was playing ultimate improv. I think he literally thinks that the world is just his play place and he could do whatever he wanted and test out whatever he wanted. He was so insanely creative and manipulative with his tactics. You can't remotely blame any of the victims for falling for his act. Not that I would ever blame any of the victims for this. His act was so good, and then on top of the fact that he's good looking and that he's charming and that he's well read and that he looks clean and cut, and all that stuff is just very important factors. And his next victim would fall for his injury act in April 1974. 18-year-old Susan Elaine Raincourt would be doing laundry on her college campus in central Washington state. And while doing laundry, she would up and disappear. There would be a massive search done and there would be no results. Only later on would there be evidence that mounted that Raincourt was one of Ted Bundy's victims. And other students that were on campus would recall that Raincourt had been approached by a man named Ted, who had his arm in a sling. So, like, again, like, you're using your own name. I mean, I'm glad you're stupid. I'm glad you're stupid. But this would be when he started to feign injuries. So if a man in a sling comes up to you asking for help, just say, you. And the next month in May, Roberta Kathleen Parks would disappear on her campus at Oregon State University. Bundy would SA her and murder her either in Oregon or in Washington. We're not sure. But investigators would later find her skull on the same mountain as many of the others on Taylor Mountain in Washington. Now, after Bundy's last victim, Roberta, he would start to evolve, and not in a good way. At first, he was SAing them and then killing and disposing of them, and then just leaving them to decompose on their own. But he would start to dip his toe into just when you think it can't get any worse. And in June, Bundy would claim 2 more victims, only 10 days apart this time. On June 1st, 1974, he would abduct 22-year-old Brenda Ball in the town of Burien, Seattle, pretending to be handicapped and asking for help. Witnesses would say that they saw her with a man that was also wearing a sling before she disappeared. Her skull would also be found eventually with all the others on Taylor Mountain in Washington as well. And on June 11th, 1974, so this is only 10 days later, 18-year-old Georgianne Hawkins vanished outside the University of Washington, with witnesses saying they last saw her with a man that was fitted with crutches and struggling with a briefcase outside of a brown VW Bug. Jordan would be knocked unconscious and then to death. And this would be his first reported victim of... So what he would do with the women when he was committing is essentially he would essay them, murder them, and then drop them off at their burial point, and usually just leave them in like covered up or in some sort of shallow grave. And then he would just periodically keep coming back to that body to do vile things to it up until the point that their decomposition just made it not possible to do so anymore, or to the point where he just thought they were gross and no longer hot enough. Either way, he just became more and more of a sick basically. So Ted Bundy had killed 6 women that we know of before he started committing necrophilia to his future victims. But this would be something he would do to all the rest of them, essentially. At least that's what we assume, based off of evidence. And Bundy would begin to grow bolder with his abductions in July, abducting 2 victims in just one day. So in broad daylight on July 14th, 1974, at Lake Sammamish State Park in Issaquah, sorry if I said that wrong, about a 20-minute drive from Seattle, witnesses reported a man with his left arm in a sling had approached several women that day, introducing himself as Ted. Anyway, and asked for help rigging his sailboat to his car. One woman initially would oblige, but grew hesitant as she approached his brown Volkswagen Beetle with no sailboat in sight. Red flags. Red flags. Luckily, this girl saw the red flags after Ted would say to her, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, it's at my folks' house, just to jump up the hill," he said in a British accent. So now he's masking his accent with a British accent, which again is just another layer to this, because if they're looking for a British guy, they're like, oh, it can't be Ted Bundy, right? But she saw right through that bullshit and she fucking booked it, dude. After he motioned to the passenger door to get in, she did. She just fucking bolted. But a little while later, she saw another woman walking beside Ted towards the parking lot where his car and sailboat was, and they were deep in conversation. This woman was Janice Ann Ott, and she would be abducted that day, unfortunately. And 4 hours later, Denise Marie Nasland would endure the same fate. And their bodies would be found months later, but their killer was unknown at the time. But years later, Bundy told investigators that Ott was still alive when he kidnapped Nasland. He claimed that one was forced to watch the other get murdered before she was, which is just so f***ed up and terrible. It would just be so horrifying. I just feel bad for all of these women, and like they just didn't know. Just like always have your guard up. That's like half the reason why I make these videos, is just to let people know. I mean, I know this is the 70s and stuff and it was a different time, but my God, dude, it is still so prevalent, especially with like the, you know, sexual trade and all that kind of stuff. This is how they get people. Like, it's nice to help people, but also just have your guard up. Have your guard up, please. But the woman who escaped that day, that also witnessed Bundy take the other girls, had an interaction with them, so she had a pretty good description to tell the police. And lo and behold, the idiot said that his name was Ted, and she would describe him as having sandy blonde hair, being 5'10", and about 160 pounds. And he had a brown VW bug. So they commissioned a sketch of the suspect finally. And like, I think that's a pretty good sketch. Like, I don't even know, like, I don't even understand how people describe people. Like, I guess I would describe him as like having like a sharp nose and like shaggy-ish hair. I mean, it kind of looked like him, right? And people recognized that it looked like him too. And they were saying like, whoa, that's so weird, Ted. Doesn't that look like you? And he's like, yeah, but I mean, the eyes are all weird. I mean, they got the unibrow, but I don't, oh, so it is you. No. I'm much better looking than that. Like, I don't know, he's a pretty looking guy. It is me. It's me. But the police had no idea how close they were to actually catching Ted Bundy at this time, because he worked on Seattle's Slewer Slide hotline, and the Seattle Police Department even nominated him to be the director of the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Committee at the time. He was just sitting right there, but the police like couldn't put two and two together, because that's just police in the 60s and 70s and 80s, because they can't do their job. It's easy in hindsight to say that they suck. Anyway, and his colleague at the Slewer Slide Hotline Center, Ann Rule, even reported her suspicion about Bundy to the police after seeing the sketch. So she's the one that's just like, Ted, that looks just like you, doesn't it? It's a bit uncanny, actually. Don't you have a brown VW bug? Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy. Stop barking. Nala, stop barking. I don't know why she does that. It's really... Come get this guy. He's a murderer. And they're just like, he's good looking. Like, he can't have done it. Like, that's literally why the cops didn't do anything. Is because he was a clean-cut, well-educated guy. They were just like, he couldn't have done it. You know, that's crazy talk. That's crazy. And you're a woman, so nothing correct comes out of your mouth. All right? This is the 70s. You just were able to vote like 20 years ago. Yeah, you need to shut the fuck up. All right? Know your place. And even his devoted girlfriend at the time, Liz Kendall, contacted the police on 3 occasions to suggest that they might be looking for her boyfriend. But she was rebuffed each time. So she was made to feel like she was the idiot for even thinking that. So she would eventually just think that she was the idiot for thinking that and stay with him. And convinced that she wasn't being taken seriously because she was a woman, classic, she asked her father to talk to the police instead, but he refused, warning her that it would ruin Bundy's career and reputation if she was wrong, which she wasn't. But she would say about her father that he so liked Ted, as we all did, she says. I feel in hindsight he chose Ted over his daughter, and that is so sad, dude. It's so sad. But this guy was just a master of manipulation. And 6 more people would even call and confirm that they thought it might be Ted Bundy based off of the description and the sketch. But the police would say, no, there's no way that a clean-cut law student with no record could ever be a serial killer. Are you stupid? But also, to give them a bit of the benefit of the doubt, the police, that is, they were getting about 200 tips a day regarding this case. So, although unfortunate, at this time, it did kind of make sense that they didn't nail him down as a #1 suspect at this point. But to not even investigate him at all is bonkers to me. So as the net started to close on Bundy more and more, and he started to feel the pressure around him, he knew he had to get the out of Dodge. So he up and left to Salt Lake City, Utah, to conveniently go to law school. He would also get baptized in the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints. Can't wash those sins away, sonny. But he would mostly just do it purely for image, just to make it look good. You know, how could you be a serial killer if you get baptized? I don't know. But you can. And the baptism was made in vain because he would just end up killing people anyway, almost immediately after getting to Utah. But Bundy would temporarily try to de-escalate his murders, or to not murder, to de-escalate his crimes, if you will. He'd tell himself, okay, Bundy, we're going to pick her up. All right, we're just gonna go pick her up, okay? And just, you know, rape her, and then we're just gonna drop her off. All right, buddy, you got this. You got this. You're a smart guy. You have control over your impulses. You're not gonna murder her. All right. And then he would just end up and killing them anyway. So good try though. And those first few women being Nancy Wilcox, who was abducted in October 1974, and Melissa Ann Smith and Laura Ann Amy, and they'd all be found in the mountains in Utah soon after, having been defiled after death multiple times up until the point of unrecognizable decomposition. But there would be another survivor though, and her name was Rhonda Stapley. She would be waiting for the bus when Bundy would offer her a ride in his brown VW Bug. He would then take her to Cottonwood Canyon, where he would SA her and her multiple times over and over. But the reason she was able to escape was because Bundy looked away from her for only a few seconds and she would just absolutely bolt out of there. But unfortunately, she was afraid of being blamed and ridiculed for the event, so she would keep this from her family, her friends, and obviously the media and police for over 40 years, until she finally revealed it and appeared on multiple media interviews recounting the incident.
The last thing that I remember was coming to after being unconscious. He had moved several feet away and had turned his back on me, and I was able to run. My pants were wadded up around my ankles, and I tripped and fell into a fast-moving mountain river that swept me away from my attacker and saved my life.
So while this is all happening, Liz Kendall is just sitting at home with Molly, fully oblivious to what's going on in Utah. But they're still together. Ted and Liz are technically still together. She did have her suspicions though at the time, because Bundy's behaviors were getting increasingly more and more strange, if you will. Particularly noting his late night absences and strange items found that he could not explain, such as medical supplies and women's clothing that did not belong to her. Pretty sus. But despite these doubts, she did not connect him to the murders until much later. And I feel like that was mostly because there were people in her ear just saying that he couldn't have done this because he is who he is. He's, you know, he's successful with his law school and politics, and he's clean cut and he's well educated and he's good looking, and he could never be capable of doing that. So she was just kind of brainwashed through this whole process up until the trials, really, but we'll get into that. But November 8th, 1974 would prove to be crucial for the eventual capture and conviction of Bundy. First posing as a police officer named Ted Roseland, Bundy approached Carol DeRanch at the Fashion Place Mall in Murray, Utah. He told the 18-year-old girl that her car was broken into and she needed to go to the police station. This is like one that it's just kind of like, really? You didn't question that at all? I mean, she was probably just so nice and just trusted everyone. But he literally told her, a stranger, that, hey, I think your car was broken into. I need to take you to the police station. And she's just like, okay. Like, it's just like red flags. Just think about it, please, for anybody watching right now. And for some reason that happens to you. For him to know that it was your car means that he was stalking you, right? Anyway, I digress. But she trusted his story, and DeRanch willingly got into his car. But she quickly noticed that something was wrong. They didn't drive towards the police station, and Bundy's friendly demeanor quickly shifted into a cold absence. When she asked him what he was doing, he just didn't answer, which is just, that would be so terrifying, just like for him to just coldly be driving and you're just like slowly freaking out, realizing what happened. Like, I just can't imagine. And although he managed to force her wrists into a pair of handcuffs and he threatened her with a gun, DeRanch broke out of the car and ran for her life. Thank God. And she would find refuge with a couple driving nearby, who brought the distraught DeRanch to the police station. But she couldn't find Officer Ted Roseland's face on any of the books of their mugshots, because at this point, Ted hadn't been officially arrested for anything. Like, he had those little arrests when he was a kid, but he never got charged for anything, so he wasn't actually on the books for anything. And only a few hours later, this guy doesn't fucking stop. He would approach a 17-year-old by the name of Debbie Kent after a performance of a high school play in Bountiful, Utah, and he would succeed in abducting this young girl. But despite killing and kidnapping Kent, Bundy left behind a clue in the parking lot, a key that matched the handcuffs that DeRanch escaped with earlier that day. And he would be stopped by the highway patrol later that day, and they'd find essentially a ripe kit and a murder kit in the back of his V-dub. They would find a ski mask, another mask made from pantyhose, a crowbar, handcuffs, trash bag, rope, ice pick, and other items that were heavily suspicious. So the police would take him in. And although the police were not able to connect Bundy to Kent and other similar kidnappings, DeRanch would play a central role in Bundy's 1976 conviction, when her testimony identified him as the man who kidnapped and yeah, Duranch. You made up for being stupid in the beginning because you didn't. I'm glad you didn't die and that you did that. Good job. And he would be sentenced to prison in Utah for a minimum of 1 to 15 years. What kind of gap is that? That's 1 year for kidnapping and assaulting somebody. It's crazy to me. And it's so obvious that he did more because of his Ripen kit in the back of his car. But anyway, so now Ted is in jail for the first time. But this is also the time when he would be extradited to Colorado, where he was being charged with the murder of Karen Campbell. And this is where Ted gets tricky and slippery, dude. This guy doesn't like to stay behind bars. So before, Ted had used a public defender in the case of Duranch, but once he got extradited to Colorado, he decided he's too smart for everybody and that he would just act as his own defense counsel, which, I mean, he kind of was really smart. I'm gonna, like, he was obviously very smart, and especially in this case, because if you represent yourself in court at the time, even being a prisoner already, you are allowed to use the library to study law books, and you're allowed to do so without handcuffs, and Ted was very privy to this. So on June 7th, 1977, Bundy would escape from the Pitkin County Courthouse Law Library by jumping from the second-story window while on recess during the preliminary hearing. He would twist his ankle, ironically, because he always acted like he was injured, and then he actually twisted his ankle, so f*** you, Ted Bundy. And then he would get up and just run into the forests of Colorado, evading police.
Bundy jumped out of this second-story window at the front of the Pitkin County Courthouse this morning. He was scheduled for a court appearance and apparently had been locked into the law library by sheriff's deputies. Witnesses say he left in a hurry. However, nobody saw him open the window, and he escaped clean in an unknown direction.
And he would be out there for 6 days, breaking into cabins and stealing food and water. He would also steal a car because he loved stealing cars. And he would try to make his way out of Colorado, but he would be a dumbass and be driving erratically and be pulled over and then recaptured again only 6 days later after his escape. And what's kind of funny and awesome is the fact that he was most likely going to get off for this murder charge that he was currently on trial for and that he escaped from, because all the evidence in that trial was completely circumstantial and DNA testing wasn't a thing yet, so they had nothing on him basically. So he was pretty much in the clear at this point. So him escaping was essentially the nail in the coffin. So he would be put in jail again, but this mother slippery fucker decided to break out of jail again, or at least try to. And it's also important to note that it was at this time that he already started to gain traction in the media, and women were starting to fawn and fangirl over this psychopath. So while in jail, Bundy would acquire a hacksaw from another inmate that had to fucking hurt, if you know what I mean. And he would obtain $500 that was sent into him from fans from around the country, mostly women. And he would start to hack and saw a 1 square foot hole, Andy Dufresne style, shout out to Shawshank Redemption, one of my favorite movies, into the corner of the cell ceiling every night during shower time when all the cellmates would be showering. He would just be hacking away at this hole in the ceiling. I don't know what he covered it with though. I feel like it'd be pretty obvious to see if you were a guard or something, but I guess not. During this time, he would also lose 35 pounds in order to fit through this hole. So if this guy was committed to actually de-escalating as much as he was to losing weight, we would have a much different story now, but I digress. So Ted would lose the weight and dig the hole, and he would even do practice runs during this time to see if he could get away with it and if there was any other factors that he had to take into account during his escape. Again, very smart. So once he built up the confidence to do the deed on December 30th, 1977, he would make another escape attempt. He would crawl into his hole and he would pop out into the jail's crawl space, break through the ceiling into the apartment of the chief jailer, who was conveniently out with his girlfriend at the time, and he would walk out the door to freedom. From there, he would steal a car and make his way to Chicago, where he would go for a pit stop, and then make his way to Tallahassee, Florida, a place where nobody wants to go except for Ted Bundy. I'm just kidding. And this is where he would continue his heinous crimes in an even more brutal fashion. And in the meantime, Liz was just grappling with the fact that everyone and their dog were saying he's a murderer now, you know, because she was just giving him the benefit of the doubt, and everybody that was saying that he wasn't one is saying that he is one. Besides her dad, her dad really, really liked him. So she was just in the state of denial, but was socially being forced to distance herself from him. So at this point, she is now distancing herself because she knows that he escaped from jail, which just makes you look guilty, to be honest. And she doesn't want to be a part of that at all. But so Bundy, now feeling like an untouchable god at this point, decided to go on an absolutely horrific spree, starting at Omega House slaughterings in Florida. So on January 15th, 1978, in the early hours, Ted would enter the Omega House at Florida State University in Tallahassee. And within approximately only 15 minutes, Bundy brutally attacked 4 sleeping women. Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy were murdered. Bowman was strangled with a nylon stocking, and Levy suffered severe beatings and a bite mark on her body, which later played a very crucial role in Bundy's conviction. The 2 other women, Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner, survived the attacks despite their serious injuries. And Bundy's rampage would continue that night. After he brutally attacked 4 women, he would go on to attack Cheryl Thomas as well, who lived nearby. He was an absolute animal. He was an insatiable monster at this point, and he wouldn't be done just yet. After he murdered those 2 women and Cheryl Thomas, Ted Bundy would have about a month of a cool down period to lay low, and he would break that cooling period by going to a junior high school in Lake City, Florida on February 9th, 1978. And Ted Bundy would call over 12-year-old Kimberly Leach to help him with directions, but soon after he would kidnap her. Bundy would then and murder the 12-year-old girl. Piece of shit, I want to fucking kill him. I hope he's burning in hell. I fucking hate him so much. And Kimberly's body was later discovered at Sewanee River State Park, badly decomposed. And this crime would be Bundy's last known murder before his final arrest in Pensacola later that month. And he would get caught for the same shit he got caught for before. This guy isn't as smart as we thought, I guess. Thank God. So on February 15th, 1978, in Pensacola, Florida, 31-year-old Bundy was driving a stolen orange Volkswagen Beetle. This guy loved Beetles, and I don't know why. He looks like a loser in them. I feel like only 16-year-old girls drive that kind of car. But anyway, he caught the attention of Pensacola police officer David Lee for having a stolen vehicle and for also driving erratically. So David would pull Bundy over, and when challenged, Bundy initially provided a stolen identification, but he was recognized by the officer during the arrest process, so Bundy would then attempt to run, but very quickly be subdued and arrested. Go David Lee. And shortly after being arrested for the 3rd and final time, Bundy would be charged for the Omega murders due to the forensic evidence being found, which was a dental impression of Ted's that matched the bite marks inflicted upon Lisa Levy, and due to the witnesses placing him in that area at the time of the murders as well. So everything's coming together finally. Everything's coming together. The pod is full, and now we're just dumping that shit over. So now at this point, Liz is pretty much completely cutting off Ted Bundy. She has distanced herself from him, and he doesn't really care. I mean, he doesn't really care about anything, but soon after Liz would go, a woman named Carol Ann Boone would come into the picture, a woman that he knew back in 1974 working with her, and she was just obsessed with Ted. So she was by his side through this next entire trial period and for years after he got convicted as well. This is a psychopath. She looks like a psychopath, dude. So in June 1979, Ted Bundy would be the first trial to be televised nationally.
Mr. Bundy? Yes, sir. The court wants to talk to you, man. Come up to the bar here. This court is not going to follow your schedule.
The beginning of Ted Bundy's trial for the Chi Omega murders was a spectacle largely because Bundy chose to serve as his own defense attorney. Again, having a legal background and having been a law student emboldened him to make the unusual decision, because it was not common at all to do this, especially in a murder trial. So it was like a movie playing itself, basically, for people watching. This self-representation was highly unorthodox and very risky for Ted, contributing pertaining to the media circus surrounding the trial. And his interactions with the judge and prosecution were often contentious, and his direct involvement in the proceedings, such as cross-examining witnesses, added a dramatic and unsettling layer to the trial, attracting public and media interest even further. And just watching him throughout the trials, because I watched a lot leading up to this, he's just like so overly confident and smiling and laughing and just talking down to people. He's just like, just a grade A fucking narcissistic psychopath, and it just makes me mad watching him. And he would talk about himself in the third person, and it was just very strange. But also I could see why people were so intrigued by this trial. I mean, I know I would have been like watching it. I wouldn't have been one of his fans or anything, but I think it was extremely interesting to watch at the time. And during the middle stage of Ted Bundy's trial, the prosecution's presentation of the forensic evidence was pivotal. One of the most significant pieces of the evidence was the bite mark analysis. Experts testified that the bite marks found on Lisa Levy's body was conclusively matched Bundy's teeth. And he had some fucked up teeth, dude. It's like so obvious, and the way he tried to like talk his way out of it was like almost embarrassing.
When you were arrested on February 15th, 1978 in Pensacola, did you have a chip in your right front tooth?
No, I did not.
When did your tooth become chipped?
Best as I can recall, it would have been the middle part of March of 78.
And this testimony became a critical component of the case, offering direct physical evidence linking Bundy to the crime, which is basically best case scenario. Additionally, the emotional testimonies of the survivors added a profound human element to the proceedings as well for the jury, including Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler, both who survived the brutal assaults in the Omega sorority house, vividly recounting the terror and attacks and strengthening the prosecution's case against Bundy. So these elements combined made this phase of the trial both gripping and crucial in the move towards Bundy's conviction. And Bundy would exhibit a range of behaviors that were often seen as audacious and unsettling by people watching. Taking on the role of his own attorney, he displayed a disturbing level of confidence and charm that was incongruent with the seriousness of the charges against him. So when I was saying like he's laughing and being just so ostentatious and just a prick, basically. He was just so laissez-faire about the whole thing. And this included cross-examining witnesses and sometimes directly interacting with the victims' families as well, which many found disturbing and extremely disrespectful, obviously. And the public reaction to Bundy during the trial was mixed. Some viewers were horrified by the details of the crimes and his apparent lack of remorse, while others were strangely fascinated by his charisma and intelligence, because he quite literally had super fans during this trial. These fans being predominantly women, because we're crazy sometimes, let's be real, often filled the courtrooms, some even mimicking Bundy's hairstyle and dress. This unusual fan base would add a surreal aspect to the proceedings, as they often expressed support for Bundy. And he would almost like show off for them in interviews and anytime he was in the public eye.
78204 Florida statute.
I'll plead not guilty right now.
And your grand jurors being present in said court further gives the court to be informed and understand that Theodore Robert Bundy on the 15th day of January in Leon County, Florida, did then and there unlawfully attempt to kill a human being, to wit, Karen Chandler, by beating her about the head and knowingly or intentionally causing great bodily harm, and said attempt was perpetrated by said Theodore Robert Bundy from or with a premeditated design or intent to effect the death of said Karen Chandler.
And this would complicate the public's perception of him as a charismatic yet brutal murderer. The presence of these fans highlighted the complex and often conflicting responses to Bundy's persona. This duality contributed to the media frenzy, making this trial a landmark in public interest and television broadcasting, and also influencing how future criminal trials would be covered, because there's just obvious bias being made by televising this. And you can kind of see that also in like the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trials. Like it's impossible not to have a bias when you're watching it right in front of you and favor one over the other based off of other people's opinions and based off of what you're seeing, not even just the evidence. And Bundy, I mean, he didn't really have a defense. It would all center around questioning the reliability of the scientific validity of the forensic evidence presented against him, particularly the bite mark evidence. He also attempted to undermine the credibility of witnesses and their testimonies, and suggested that the investigation itself was biased against him due to his prior criminal charges. And this approach was just seen as audacious and was ultimately unsuccessful. Because at the end of Ted Bundy's trial for the Omega murders, the jury deliberated for under 7 hours, which sounds like a long time, but that's a pretty good time. That's pretty quick, indicating the compelling nature of the evidence presented. Bundy would be found guilty of the murders of Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, as well as the assaults of 3 other women. Following the verdict, the court would sentence him to death. Yeah, dude. You, dude. I hope you're burning in hell.
A judge in Miami today followed the jury's recommendation and sentenced Theodore Bundy to die in the electric chair for the murder of 2 co-eds. Bundy is the 136th person under death sentence in Florida.
And Judge Edward Cowart made remarks that were noted for their unusual tone of personal reflection. He commented on the tragedy of Bundy's crimes, given Bundy's intelligence and potential to contribute positively to society. It was just like a weird tone. It was just like, oh man, that's a shame because you're awesome. You killed those people, but you're pretty great, you know? And this is exactly what he said.
It's a tragedy for this court to see such a total waste, I think, of humanity that I've experienced in this court. You're a bright young man. If you made a good lawyer, I'd love to have you practice in front of me, but you went another way, partner.
He's literally saying, like, you're pretty good, dude. And I don't give a shit that you killed all those women. F them, honestly. F them. You know, I do it too, behind the scenes. I'm just kidding. That's false. But it was just strange. It just goes to show how incredibly charismatic and manipulative and smart he actually was, because he was able to manipulate a whole ass judge, dude. This guy murdered multiple women and got a guilty verdict for it. And this guy's just saying, you're all right. But after his sentencing of the Omega murders, he would be put on trial again for the murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. In 1980, Bundy was tried for the kidnapping and murder of Kimberly, and the trial would be particularly emotional due to the young age of the victim and to the brutal nature of the crime. And Bundy was found guilty again and received another death sentence. Double homicide. Shit, man. It's not looking good for you. And Ted Bundy, being the tenacious narcissistic psychopath that he was, continuously filed for appeals, challenging everything from forensic evidence used in trials to the competency of the jury. But all his appeals were ultimately denied, bitch. And during Ted Bundy's trial in Florida, after he was sentenced, his romantic life included a significant relationship with whom I mentioned before, Carol Ann Boone. And Boone believed in Bundy's innocence and moved to Florida to be closer to him during his trials. And in a dramatic turn, during his 1980 trial for the murder of Kimberly Leach, the 12-year-old girl, Bundy would propose to Boone in the courtroom while she was testifying on his behalf. What a giant piece of smelly goddamn shit, dude. And the proposal was legally recognized under Florida law, which stated that marriage declaration in court in front of a judge constituted a legal marriage. So this guy like found a loophole and just devalued the whole trial of Kimberly. It's just disgusting. And Boone would become pregnant and gave birth to a daughter soon after as well. I guess he got conjugal visits, I don't know. And her name would be Rose. And this would be in 1982, and she would claim that it was Bundy's. However, the relationship did become strained, especially after Bundy began making confessions to his crimes. And Boone would eventually move away, ending all contact with him. In the final years of this piece of shit's life on death row, Ted Bundy, like I said, would begin confessing to numerous murders, some of which remained unresolved. And these confessions started around 1986 and continued up until his execution in 1989. Bundy detailed specific actions and methods he used in the crimes, providing information that only the murderer would know. His aim in doing this was just to manipulate the system, potentially extending his life by offering these confessions in exchange for delays in his execution schedule. So he'd be able to control the narrative around the crimes up to the end. But alas, Ted Bundy would be executed on January 24th, 1989 at Florida State Prison in Stark, Florida. On that day, he was put to death in the electric chair known as Old Sparky. I feel like every electric chair everywhere is named Old Sparky. I've been to 2 prisons, not me. I visited like prisons that have been out of commission. Anyway, their electric chairs were named Oldsburg. Anyway, he would be put to death at 7:16 a.m. local time. Bundy's execution followed a decade of trials, appeals, confessions, and numerous murders. And his final words were reportedly directed to his lawyer and close friends, expressing his love and appreciation. Go f*** yourself. His last words were, "I'd like to give my love to my family and friends." Whatever, dude. Burn in hell, I don't give a shit. And Bundy's death would mark the end of a long and tumultuous legal saga and brought closure to many families and victims. And crowds outside the prison cheered upon hearing the news of his execution, which is metal as
Ted Bundy, even in death, stirred hatred.
But anyway, that